Welcome to the How Does She Do It podcast. My guest today is Myriah Wallace. Myriah, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
And it's a pleasure. So, for our guests, our viewers today that don't know much about you, take the time now to introduce yourself. Tell us where you are. Tell us a little bit
Okay,
about who you are and also what you do.
excellent. Okay. Well, like you mentioned, my name's Myriah Wallace. A little bit of personal background is I am a mom of an 8 and 9-year-old.
Whew.
Wonderful, wonderful time, married, and I live in a very rural part of Southwest Missouri. So grew up on a farm, still have a farm. Um, I've got a graduate degree in counseling psychology. So I've spent time being a therapist for a while until I recently switched directions. And that's actually where some of my success is right now that I kind of came to talk about. It's more of a passion. So I have switched from therapy and treating severe mental illness because I started to notice a pattern with leaders in the business
Mm.
industry. So I eventually moved from therapist and I began to be a supervisor. And then I moved up to management. And then before I knew it, I was overseeing four different departments. Some of them were large, as far as therapy, outpatient, multiple different clinics, a crisis department, and some other community mental health outreach. So kind of did that. And I learned firsthand just how difficult it can be to be a leader in today's world because
Mm.
things are piled on you. And so I was like, people are often shoved into this role without a lot of training and without a lot of support, high expectations from their directors, high expectation from their team. So you get sandwiched.
Yeah.
So I saw that I really wanted to help leaders out. And so that's where I am today. I recently started Myriah Wallace Coaching and Consulting, where I help emerging leaders, women, or new leaders gain some real skills and confidence to just make themselves a first-class leader.
Oh,
Yep.
I'm so excited. Okay. I want to go back a little bit and talk about your experience as a therapist, counselor. First of all, give us your alphabet soup, right? What are your formal credentials?
Okay. Yeah. That's always a weird thing to say. So it's Myriah Wallace, MS, LPC. So Master of Science with a licensed professional counselor.
Which is a huge thing. That's no
Yeah.
easy title to get. You get these like 5 letters, but it literally probably costs you that much more in years and triple that in terms of finances
Oh, yeah.
too.
Absolutely. Years of stress, finances, research, practice. By the time you do 6 years of school, you do 2 years postgraduate supervision with a veteran therapist. So you're not out on the field practicing uh, individually or independently, I guess, rather, until you've done about 8 years you've given.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
it can be pretty stressful, but it's definitely rewarding.
And I want to highlight the challenge it took you to get that credential because I have observed, and you tell me, I've observed it seems like everybody with a social media account is a pocket therapist, right? People throw
Yes.
around all sorts of terms, people,
Uh-huh.
all sorts of things.
Uh-huh.
People are just giving out therapeutic diagnoses. Oh, this
Mm-hmm.
person is a narcissist, or this person is this, or this. It's like happening all in our world. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this because it's to me, it's like amazing that there's an awareness of mental health. There's less of a stigma. We can
Mm-hmm.
talk about depression, we can talk about anxiety a lot more. But it seems like that authority piece is hard to find. Like we hear a lot of research shows, and my question is always,
Mm-hmm.
what research? Right?
Yes. Yeah. So that I'm so glad you mentioned that, because nothing will frustrate me more when I hear a client come to me and say, well, I saw this on Instagram or I saw a TikTok and I think I have OCD or I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
ADHD or
Mhm.
my boyfriend or girlfriend is a certified narcissist, or I have borderline personality disorder. And I'm like, can you please share with me your symptoms and I'll determine your criteria, rather than a 10-second clip.
Right.
And yeah, so usually it requires quite a bit of education, just as some people may go to the doctor and think, oh, I've got a heart murmur, oh, I'm scared that I have cancer. I've looked up these on WebMD.
Right.
So, oftentimes people are just using the internet now just to self-diagnose and actually kind of be dangerous, because, you may treat something completely different. Um,
Yeah.
like depression with psychotic features can sometimes mimic schizophrenia. And both of those are two different medication classes. So you've got to have a professional in there and figuring out the symptoms and watching you over time. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's pretty funny.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that we can look to you as an authority on the subject of mental health. And I'm curious, what are some of the common mental health issues that you dealt with in your practice, specifically looking towards women leaders?
Ooh, good one. So, just in general, I the like you mentioned, the mental health industry is absolutely booming. So if there's a therapist out there, they are going to have job security for years and years to come. Um, but a lot of that
As they
really,
should, right? But as they should, right? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. A lot of that came with COVID and political tension, and just with the whole country being divided, mask, not mask, vaccinate, not vaccinate, vaccinate.
Right.
Israel, Palestine, all
Right.
of these, it's just incredibly divided. And when you have that, you have a lot of people experiencing depression and anxiety, and they're questioning their sanity. And then you've got friendships and families that are broken. And that's where they start to go to therapy, just because it's an overwhelming amount. And so specifically for women, we're seeing a lot of increase in stress, an increase in burnout, and an increase in depression. Just because when you're a woman leader, you are not only expected to do your job and do it well, you're expected to carry a typical role as a mom or a
Mm,
wife, and take care of the kids and, have the dinner and commute and carpool and attend everything.
yeah.
I mean, it's come a long way um, recently, but society still has that small expectation in the back of your brain. So you have to be a superwoman to excel at work and excel at home. And that in and of itself is a formula for burnout.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of those things. Burnout is something that comes up a lot. Again, it's a buzzword in social media and other podcasts. So let's talk about burnout. What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing from a mental health perspective for these women leaders?
Yeah. So actually, now that you mentioned that, I have a few of the things. So sometimes you go in and you have the best intentions to be a wonderful leader, uh, and lead by example, people who go into that. And sometimes when you give so much of yourself and you want to be there for your team, you sacrifice a lot of your own sanity. You focus so outwardly on others' success that sometimes when you take on more and more and more, you give so much of yourself. You're neglecting your own health, your own self-care. And then sometimes even your job duties or your responsibilities are neglected because you're putting so much into your team, because that's expected of you these days. And that's really hard, for a lot of women, just giving that quality to your direct reports. And it helps with, or it, what's the word that I'm looking for? It takes away your peace of mind and your innovation, in a sense, because you're no longer able to think creatively and solve problems and that sort of thing, because you're so busy caring for other people.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about the challenge that these women leaders are facing. It's I think what you're saying is very common to our audience. Like I
Mhm.
have two kids under two. You had at one point two kids under two. You have an 8-year-old and
Yeah.
9-year-old. You're married. I'm married. You have a career. I have a career. And I think a lot of the listeners are in the same position. It feels normal.
Mhm.
Before we started recording, we were talking about, being tired, and you were giving me advice. You're like, look, just understand you're going to sleep again someday. And I said to you, I looked in the mirror after I got ready this morning and I said, how do I look? And I said, I look tired. And I'm like, okay, this is just a season of tired. It just is
Yeah.
what it is.
Mhm.
But, but Mariah, doesn't it feels normal to us? Is it?
That's a tough question to answer. I think in different countries, there's different cultural expectations. And I think from what I've heard is like Japan and the US have some of the highest expectations in the work culture. And it's just kind of a normal thing for the US where you work, and you just have to sacrifice when you're a mom. And absolutely, I can remember for the first 3 or 4 years of being a mom, people just told me that I perpetually looked tired or sick because I constantly had circles under my eyes.
And they're
And,
always
I
getting
was just,
sick.
yeah, yeah. And they're sick. And,
Like,
you
literally, my
can't,
daughter is home right now because she has pink eye. So,
oh,
it's
that's
like
the
it's always
worst.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's contagious, so you can't send them back to school, and yeah, all of that. So, and it stinks when you get sick and you're throwing up or have a cold, because you got to take care of them
Right.
too. And oh my gosh,
So
that's a nightmare.
I've heard about this, as it's referred to as, like, invisible labor. The
Mhm,
invisible labor that women have that's related to not only the actual responsibilities that we tend to still have. We tend to still have the responsibility of home,
mhm,
domestic things,
mhm,
laundry, dishes, food, meal planning, cleaning. That those responsibilities still tend to fall on women, even for professional women, high performing women. And then there's also the invisible labor as well, right? Which comes with the responsibility to manage all of the things that are unseen,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I think in my experience, this is the longest I have been unpregnant in 3 years. So I'm like 7 months postpartum, starting to fully get my capacities back and
Mhm,
think about what I went through the last 3 years. And I recognize it was so hard because of that psychological labor that I was trying to carry while at the same time understand who I am now,
mhm,
that I'm a
mhm.
mom.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty funny. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. You lose a little bit of yourself, of your own hopes, your dreams, uh, your hobbies, because everything is required of you as a mom. If you don't put all of that in, there's like an innate amount of guilt that you might hold because maybe I'm not the mom that I should be, or I'm not giving enough, or I'm being too impatient, or I'm getting frustrated too easily. And so sometimes it's just like, is this what it's about? Am I going to have to give and give and give and feel annoyed or irritated? When does the old me come back to?
Mm.
And it's like, I've had moms that are just, they sit mostly in therapy, where they're like, I feel like I'm just sitting at home and I'm feeding, patting backs, changing diapers day in and day out. And it's just kind of like a pattern where they can't get out of. They don't see the future, you
Yeah.
know. And eventually you do come back to your old self. It's just a season, like you mentioned. And it may take a long time, but now I'm in a place where I can teach my kids, I can share with them values and experiences, go on adventures and incorporate them into my hobbies. And
I
it's
can't
just,
imagine it. I can't. I literally, I feel what you say so hard. I cannot imagine what they're gonna look like in the next
yeah.
6 months. So
Mm-hmm.
thinking about being 8 and 9, I just don't even know what it would be like to feel rested, to be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
let's go on this trip where you are like independent, where you can like
Mm-hmm.
feed yourself and you can.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine it. I,
Yeah.
what? So let's talk a little bit about the idea around women leaders who are coming to you
Mm-hmm.
specifically looking to accomplish what?
Yeah. I think the people who come to me most are the ones who lack confidence in their abilities. And you've got one of those other buzzwords that's going around right now, imposter syndrome, where they don't feel competent enough, or that they're not made for the role. And they're just always questioning their abilities as a leader because they don't feel qualified or competent.
Mhm.
And so I get a lot of the women who just need guidance, or they're not sure of themselves. And probably they really are. It's just they need to learn specific tools or way to act and different ways to carry themselves so that they can appear confident, so that it gets hardwired eventually, and then people can learn to follow and respect them. And I also just kind of pride myself in allowing shortcuts. So the things that I learned the hard way or took
Yeah.
me years, I want to give to women, now, so they can hone those skills. Just for example, one of the things that was hardest for me to learn was giving negative feedback or doing a performance plan improvement, because who wants to have that conversation with an employee, or potentially even have to fire somebody? Who wants to be the deliverer of bad news, something that could
No
change?
one.
No one. Yeah. And so I remember I would always skirt around this problem, and I would never address it as a new leader. I would be like, yeah, maybe we just need to do better at that and less of that. And sometimes just the vagueness of what I said or how I said it did nothing for
Yeah.
them. So learning ways to effectively, I have some tools that actually effectively do it, that give women the confidence to address some of these difficult problems faster, and start to learn them and hardwire some of these tools sooner than I was given the opportunity to do.
It's interesting because you do come across as a very gentle, kind, patient, easygoing personality. And I have a hard time imagining you firing someone.
Well, I think that sometimes can work to your advantage, because I've started to take on the idea and really embody this, that if you make somebody feel heard and they know that they're listened to and they know that you genuinely care about them, they know that what you're saying and what you're doing is in the best interest of them. So when you're kind and you're confident, easygoing, you don't have
Mm.
this typical uh, let's call it masculine leadership persona coming out, where you're hard and you give directives and you're demanding. People respond a lot better to somebody who's emotionally intelligent and can pick out what is really going on. And people, who doesn't love to be
Mm.
heard? When you're heard, people are going to come to you with problems prior to the emergency. A lot of people, if you're a strong, like a, what is the word? Like just a masculine leader that doesn't take no for an answer and it's their way, they're probably not going to come to you when they're struggling. So when you give this atmosphere of kindness and love, you can help coach them early on instead of just, you know, digging up the fire uh, after it happens.
I love this. One of the things I know we wanted to talk about today was the idea of culture, and leadership, and how the culture of the company or the environment that you're in is really shaped by leadership.
Mhm.
Mariah,
Yeah.
what is leadership?
Hmm. That can mean so many different things for so many different people. But I think one of the main duties is a leader, in the way that I've learned and grown to understand it, is to not just demand things of your team or have these high expectations. It is to create leaders and allow your team to be heard, allowing them, you are more helping your team than they are there to promote you and
Okay.
your skills.
So leadership is helping. Leadership is service.
Absolutely. You've got that term servant leadership. And I have found, a lot of people say, oh, that's weakness. And, that they should just follow you. And I'm like, no, you are going to have a much more productive environment with higher morale if you can be there and show up as a servant leader. People will listen and they care about you and they want to work for you.
So let's talk about your specific relationship to the subject. We already know you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a very credentialed therapist, and now you're an entrepreneur with a coaching and consulting company. Uh, why? Why did you choose all of this?
Well, that is too funny. Um, I just seeing everybody goes to therapy because of a certain diagnosis. You show up because you want to manage your anxiety, right? Or you have the TikTok buzzwords, or, I think I need to go to a therapist because of this. You picture somebody, crying or lethargic. You've got a picture of what serious mental illness is. And a lot of times that mental illness is not so apparent in what we see as a strong woman or a leader, because they don't have the time, they don't get the luxury to express that. So behind the mask is usually somebody who's experienced something at home or not at work. And they take on this stress and they pretend like everything's okay. But, at home, things are not okay. Things may be falling apart. You may see some of these strong people who, are losing sleep at night. They may be snapping at their family, they may be irritable. So I am kind of setting out to focus on the people who aren't showing these symptoms, that they're afraid to explore, afraid to address, because they're afraid that their jobs will be implicated if they show any vulnerability with,
Mm,
mental illness or something like that. And then, you don't even have to actually have a mental illness, to be burnt out or extremely stressed, but it can really impact your life. So those are the people that aren't getting the help, that aren't asking for help.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to come in, especially those that are high up in companies, because that's where you see a lot of that
Yeah.
or that masked stress.
I get it. I have to tell you, when I first started my coaching business, I was working specifically with high performers,
Mhm.
people who had achieved at the highest level of their careers in sports, and film, television, Broadway, music, winning all of those accolades,
Mhm.
right? And they were coming to me because they felt stuck at a certain level of their career personally as well. They felt like they couldn't level up and they
Mhm.
felt like they couldn't tell anybody. And so my coaching business did extremely well very quickly when I went to high ticket because I'd coached for
Uh-huh.
several years before, kind of like ad hoc, per hour, per this, per
Yeah.
that, pro
Yeah.
bono. But when I went high ticket, the first 9 months of my business, I was purely a life coach, and in the first 9 months, I did 160K cash collected, and the reason that I believe it was so successful is because I was going for individuals who everyone looked at and said, "You are already successful. What do you have to complain about? How could your
Exactly.
life be
So
painful?"
common. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Exactly, and so in the work that I do, I'm not a therapist, but what I get the pleasure of doing is helping people, um, release limiting beliefs by using NLP, by using
Mhm.
visualization. It's kind of like loosely Gestalt therapy, something called Freedom Day, where they can kind of go back on their timeline, find the where that moment occurred, unconsciously release it, come back to that, right?
Mhm.
Not therapy. However, incredibly effective when what you're wanting
Mhm.
to do is a very visible person. You're wanting to get rid of the pain or the things holding you back, and you
Mhm.
don't want to
Mhm.
have to like publicly declare it, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
funny story, the reason why I ended up switching more into focusing on business coaching while still incorporating this, I still do this work with all of my entrepreneurs. The reason I switch is because these very well-known individuals, I can never say who they were.
Oh gosh, weird, right?
I even getting testimonials, it would have to be written and they would make sure to not they wouldn't say what they had
Uh-huh.
done or what their experience was. Like, who wants to say, "Oh, I was
Mhm.
struggling with rage and alcoholism, but I
Mhm.
won this really big accolade and everyone worships me." Nobody wanted to
Yeah.
say that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I saw, that's so funny. I had seen an ad for Headspace, an online mental health uh little app that you can log into. And I was so shocked, but really happy that Kristen Bell was a person who
Mhm.
endorsed this. She came out and said what her struggles were. And I was like, man, not everybody can do that, because think about how that might affect her image, and being an actress and that sort of thing. And
Yes,
even her
exactly.
husband came in and said the things that he was struggling with. And I was like, wow, that takes some guts.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely appreciate the way social media can influence for the positive, and we
Mm-hmm.
can get, more awareness around these things for sure. But I'm gonna come back to this question because I don't think I got what I wanted to know, which is
Okay.
Mariah Wallace, you specifically, what in your life happened that led you to where you are right now?
Okay. This will get down to some of the vulnerability, the nitty gritty thing that I used to have trouble talking about. So there was an instance where I know sometimes people talk about rock bottom, and it's not necessarily a rock bottom moment for me, but to me it was one of the lowest points in my life where I just felt like things could not absolutely get any worse than they are right now. So let me just tell you what happened on my very first day of my new role as this brand new leader. So like I mentioned, I was a mom, two under two, and I was given this wonderful opportunity. And mind you, I live in a very rural area, so it took about an hour to get to my new job. And I showed up on the first day, and I'll just go out and say it, like, I had just pumped and I was ready to pump, during
Yeah.
breaks of my training, sit out in my
Super
car.
mom,
Yeah.
right?
And I was just so excited to do that. And during the first break, I did. I went out and I pumped in my car and I came back. And then while I was sitting forgive me for saying this, but one of the most boring parts of my training, like records or something like that, how to handle records. I started feeling really funny. And I can remember, like, what's going on? Am I just bored? Am I stressed? And then I had somebody sitting next to me say, are you okay? And I remember I was unable to speak at that moment. I was like, oh my gosh. And then my movement started to be involuntary. And I was like, what happened to me? And, before I knew it, 2 minutes later, I woke up and I had EMS around me in the middle of this training on the first day of my brand new job. And I had a full blown seizure, so it completely
Wow.
disrupted the classroom. All attention was on me. And I was like, what is going on? And all I can remember is saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like, I'm sorry you had to disrupt everything for me, because in a sense, I was so embarrassed. I was my most vulnerable. And I thought, nobody is going to believe me as competent when I'm sitting here having a seizure. They're always,
Oh.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh. In
yeah.
this life-altering moment, I'm guessing
Mm-hmm.
you were not aware that you were not having seizures. You didn't have this previously, okay?
No, yeah.
So in this moment, you wake up to EMS around you,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
your second thought after I just had a full-blown seizure was, "Oh, I hope I didn't disrupt everyone
Mm-hmm.
else, and I don't wanna look incompetent."
Yeah, yeah. That was the first thing that came to my head, because I always have prided myself in my independence and my strength. I always wanted to appear strong and capable, because I've worked so hard to get where I was. I worked full time, going to grad school, and I was managing this and this. And now I was like, crap. Nobody is going to trust me, trust my decisions, or they're always going to be thinking, she's going to have a seizure. Like, I got to be careful around her. So that's where my mind went, immediately. And I can remember just embarrassment flooding over me as I was laying in the ER, and people were trying to figure out who I was, who to get a hold of, because at this point I hadn't even filled out like the emergency contact information, on my first day on the job. So that was super embarrassing. And I just remember feeling that. And I thought, well, crap, I think that I'm going to lose my job. It was just so hard.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you had to figure out how to manage being a new mom, pumping at work, going to work and
Mm-hmm.
leaving your children behind. Now
Mm-hmm.
you're having seizures. Did you receive a diagnosis?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was able to get an expedited neurology appointment. And I can remember when the neurologist came to me and said, yeah, you've had a seizure. Yeah. Did you know that you can't drive? And I'm like, what?
Whoa.
She's like, yeah, I have to report it to the state. And in Missouri, you're not allowed to drive for 6 months after, one of
Oh
these
my
full blown
gosh. Oh my
seizures.
gosh.
I can remember just breaking down and crying right then and there, because I was like, I can't do anything.
You
Like,
went from being super independent to now literally
yeah,
your ability to
yeah.
even drive yourself to work
Mm-hmm,
taken
mm-hmm.
away.
Yeah. everything relied on every single person. I couldn't even go grocery shopping for my own family without having to rely on somebody to take me. I couldn't engage in some of the activities that I love to do, vacation, snorkeling, scuba diving, climbing trees. All of this eventually became dangerous, if I would
Wow.
have a seizure and fall out of these sort of things. And it was horrible. And I can just remember my husband, I had gone from a full-time mom taking care of two kids, and we've sacrificed a lot of stuff for me to be able to go back to work. But not
Right.
only did he have a full-time job, we had full-time parent duties, and now he had to full-time kind of take care of me.
Hmm.
I'm obviously could wipe my own butt and feed myself, those sort of things. But, just he had to drive me. And I thought, there's no way anybody is going to drive me an hour to work every single day. So I can remember showing up at work. Somebody did give me a ride. I can't even remember who. And I told my boss at the time, I was like, I'm sorry. This is what's happened to me. And I really hate it, but I don't know how I'm going to make it to work. And the thing that surprised me so much was like, basically I was ready to give my notice right then and there. And I
Right. It
was ready
sounds
for
like it.
her to say,
Right.
yeah, I was
Hmm.
like, you've got a disability. But I can remember her saying, oh, honey, if you find a way to get here, you still have a job with me. And I
Mm.
thought, okay, that's really weird. So she sort of believed in me. She didn't view me as incompetent, and she was willing to give me a chance. So I was like, okay, I think I can, start thinking about this. And then some reason, I don't even know how it happened, fate or whatever, something I call it miraculous, really happened. Because there was a lady there at the hospital. Her name was Janet. I just have to shout out to her, that kind of saw me have a seizure. And all of a sudden, she was just like, oh, I can help you get a ride. I live halfway in between where you are and work. He's like, yeah, if you can make it to me, I'll get you the rest of the way there. And I was like, for 6 months, you're just going to take
Wow.
me, a stranger? And it was wonderful because she was a recently widowed woman. And she was like, well,
Mm.
it's company, I'm not used to it, and I'll take the company. And so my
That's incredible.
husband, I love her. I mean, we formed a friendship, and it it was great. Just the conversations we had on the way to work. But it was so lucky because the meeting point where we were, my husband could take me because he was able to go to work, through a different road. So this halfway point became doable. I just had to get there. I was given the word that I would have my job. I had a ride, and things were just falling into place. So I
So
think from this,
pause for
yeah,
one moment. What was the diagnosis you received?
well, it ended up being partial complex epilepsy. So at first I had a couple of the big ones that were called, can't even remember, tonic clonic. But as things started to get controlled, it's partial complex. So it's just one area of my brain. And it just currently, if I miss my medication or something, which I try not to do, I lose hearing and my ability to speak, and kind of have trouble understanding people when they're talking to me. Because sometimes like, if somebody will be talking to me, I'll be like, I know now, I've had enough practice where I can be like, just a second, I'm in the middle of having a tiny seizure and can't really hear what you're saying. So give me a second. I know that I can get that out in
Wow.
time. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I
Yeah.
literally cannot even imagine, like, the way you're saying it is so calm, so nonchalant. Obviously, this is your life. You've been dealing with it for
Mm-hmm,
a long
mm-hmm,
time.
mm-hmm,
But I cannot imagine having that complexity on your already complex life,
mm-hmm,
especially y- as a leader, you're a helper. As a mom, you're a helper. As a wife, you're a helper.
mm-hmm,
You're in a
mm-hmm,
servant role that
mm-hmm,
in your line of work, you really are listening and talking, and yet this is the
Uh,
thing that in any given moment can be taken from you.
Absolutely. And the fact that you mentioned it, like right now, I may be able to say it calmly. And that has taken me an immense amount of understanding to be vulnerable and rely on teamwork. I can't do it on my own. I've had to learn the value of teamwork and how important it is. And that's one of the things that got me there. But I was not always calm and pretty. I could remember one time, this is, well, I was still going through my embarrassment stage and so ashamed of being medically fragile, that I felt a seizure coming, and somebody was getting ready to walk by my office and talk to me. And I can remember slamming the door shut on his face because I was getting ready to have a seizure. I just felt it coming along. And so I was like, well, crap. So I shut it so he couldn't see me. And it was one of the big ones where
Wow.
I lost consciousness. And I remember waking up and I was like, and this is TMI, but there was like a pile of vomit on the floor that I had no idea. And I was like, phew. I remember again the first thing, like, thank God he didn't see that. Thank God I closed the door in time. But now I'm like, it could have been dangerous if I hit my head and choked. But my ability to get over myself was so hard at first, but eventually I chipped away as people, they weren't judgmental as I thought that they were,
Do you
It
find
was,
and do you find that that's common? Is that a common thread that you see even as now a coach and a consultant for women leaders?
mhm.
That sometimes the shame, the embarrassment that we hold is greater to us than what we receive, what we expect to receive from others?
Oh, 100%. I think we worry ourselves in our own minds a lot more, and we judge ourselves more harshly than people actually are. And I like to say this, like, you may think that people are directing their attention to you and judging you, but people are really focused on themselves a lot more than they are focused on judging you and your problems. They just really want to hear about themselves. They're in their own world trying to make it. So give yourself grace, it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah, says the woman that has had some of the most challenging experiences in life. This has
Yeah.
been such an interesting perspective, and I'm thankful that you're able to come and share it looking back and to know how it has shaped you and how it
Mhm.
shapes who you're really looking to work with. I want to take the time now to talk a little bit about that. So, in your business now as an entrepreneur, who is it that you would love to work with?
Okay, this is my passion. This is where I get a little bit excited. Is my ideal person is I'm really working with women. I mean, I will absolutely take on men, but there's a unique set of problems that women face that men don't necessarily face in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking women who are new leaders or emerging leaders or who are aspiring to become more, and that they just want to get over some of these humps, these roadblocks, so they can achieve these dreams and get over themselves. So for me, getting over myself was learning to be more vulnerable and accept that teamwork's okay. I didn't have to do everything on my own.
Mm.
And so for them, if it's like lack of confidence or inability to, like being fearful of hurting somebody's feelings, when you have to do, these one-on-one difficult conversations to help them learn that, you know, people struggle, and I'm here to help you through that and guide you through. So absolutely new emerging women leaders that are just looking to, like, for a shortcut to advance their careers and gain skills.
That's so important. And there's so much more we could have talked about today. About boundaries. We could have talked about, the exact process that you take people through to really
Mhm.
get there. I love that you have this background as a therapist and you have these personal experiences as a woman in the industry. Women who, as a woman who's been in a part of a team that's had to
Mhm.
learn reliance. I love that you have all of those experiences and you can bring that to the table with your current business.
Yeah.
How can people find you if they want to work with you or if they just want to connect with you and share stories?
Oh yeah. So I just have my email, MariahWallace.com, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes or whatever
Yep.
because my name
Mariah
is
with a
spelled
Y. That's right.
horribly. Yeah. So there's that, and the social media. You could follow me on Facebook, Instagram. Myriah Wallace Consulting and Coaching is my handle.
Yep.
In my LinkedIn profile, same thing. So um, I'm finding social media is an interesting bear that you have to do these days, in order to get business. So I'm trying to be on there and provide value, and information and education to my audience too. So they can check me out and I might provide some cool tips without even having to buy a package to work with me.
That's great. And are you okay with people reaching out to you if they just have questions or they want to
Yes.
talk to you about the podcast? Can they
Mhm.
just send you a DM, email?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. DM, send me an email, all of that good stuff. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I do have one final question. And look, you've lived this big life. You have 2 children, you're married, you've had a very successful career as a therapist, also working in a
Mhm.
corporation, managing other people, and now you've taken the leap into entrepreneurship. And you're looking at working with women leaders, women
Mhm.
who are new leaders, who are emerging leaders and aspiring to become better leaders. That's a lot. That's a big life. My question, by the way, all while dealing with the diagnosis and the reality of epilepsy in your personal life.
Mhm.
So here's a question. How do you do it?
It's so funny. Oh gosh. I think the thing that changed for me was it was like a slap in the face and humility. I had to learn to be humble. It was like, and I also had to learn that somebody's always got it worse than me. I could sit in there and I could sulk and blah blah. That didn't do any good to me. I thought, man, this person with epilepsy it's so complex, or it's not curable, and they are not able to drive, and medication doesn't help them. I was able to see somebody's always got it worse than me. So I had to learn this radical acceptance, like this is my life now, and I can choose to make it good or I can choose to make it difficult. And I chose the determination and going through it. And it was just a mindset shift, you know. It,
Wow.
it takes a mindset shift to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I often believe that a lot of times the miracles we receive in life are a shift in perspective and not
Mhm.
necessarily a change in circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Perspective is everything. Exactly.
Beautiful. Ah, Mariah, thank you so much for joining me and
Yeah.
for sharing everything. Thank you for being here. And one last thing before we go, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want our listeners to know that you need to get out? Something that you need to shout at the rooftop?
Oh shoot. So one of my just everybody has come to me recently, my some of my recent clients, or just women just kind of over drinks or coffee have just said, "Oh, this is the most frustrating thing I've had to deal with in a long time." And part of that is adapting to change. So whenever they are given direct orders from their boss or the directors, they're like, "Hey, we got to do this new system, this new operating, you know, all of this." And people do not want to change. Honestly, they're pretty
Hmm.
set in their ways. And especially if you're dealing with workers that have been there a while, they just fight you. So, one of my little tidbits I like to just give this out for women is, instead of saying, like, hey, we've got this change, you've got to do it. Use this two different perspectives, like we were talking about, or different changes on it, and say, tell your team, hey, I want us to beta test this, or I want to pilot this new program. So if it fails, just beta testing or piloting, you didn't have them go through the stress of making changes. So it's not what you say, sometimes it's how you say it and how you deliver it. So that's just one of the things that I've seen people constantly talk about is changing, because this environment has changed so much in the last 4 years.
We want
So
some stability, but change is inevitable.
yes,
I love that.
change is inevitable. It's hard.
That's very in line with my background in NLP, is using the language to get the result that you want, right? It's
Mhm,
about being
mhm.
effective and saying, "Hey, we're going to beta test this and we're going to use these changes as a pilot." It really takes the pressure
Mhm.
off for
Oh yeah,
everyone.
yeah,
That's
yeah. If
beautiful.
it fails,
And
so
also
was
in your
a
life.
pilot.
And also
Yeah,
in your life, right? I can tell my husband,
yeah.
like, "Hey, look, I'm not cooking anymore because I hate
Uh-huh.
cooking.
Me too.
We're going to beta test this,
This
whatever it
meal
is.
plan.
Meal planning, hiring somebody, you do
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Fasting. No, we can't fast. Our children
Oh,
can't
I
fast, but
love intermittent fasting. I love that. But
that's different.
anyway,
I just don't want to
yeah,
cook at all. Like, can somebody else please just feed us?
yeah.
Anyway.
That's how I am. Yeah, I hear you.
We can't do everything. All right,
No,
amazing. Myriah, thank you so much for being on the show. It's truly been a pleasure.
thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share things, and hopefully people can learn something and at least be inspired through knowing through hardships and difficulty that you can achieve and you can reach your dreams.
You can do it.
You can.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you later.